I'm Walter Cronkite. Last week, the 20th century presented the first of two episodes on Ethiopia and its ruler, Emperor Haile Selassie, who is the sacred king of kings of an African empire 3,000 years old, whose upper classes consider themselves a race apart, with the features and heritage of a chosen band of biblical white men burned black by the African sun and time. They are the upholders of an unbroken Christian tradition, which in turn has bound them tightly to the past. Yet their undisputed leader, almost by the force of his will alone, has brought his people to the brink of the future. In Ethiopia, The Lion and the Cross, Part 2, we shall interview this man, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. This is our story as the Prudential Insurance Company of America presents the 20th century. The Coptic cross stands above St. George Cathedral in Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia. Christianity came here in 340 AD, flourished, broke with the Greek Orthodox Mother Church, and remained anchored in the past. Today, the Ethiopian Church, although freed from centuries of domination by the Egyptian Coptic Church through the intervention of Emperor Haile Selassie, fears the change it sees advancing on it. The instrument of change is the emperor himself, who, although he has decreed a liberal constitutional monarchy, freed slaves, granted the vote, nevertheless still appoints all cabinet ministers, senators, governors, judges, and other major officials. In effect, the emperor is still an absolute monarch, feared and loved, with the power to reward and punish, and both swiftly. It may be that the King of Kings would prefer it another way, but 90% of his subjects are illiterate, and without the word, the vote is almost useless. Coptic Christianity is the Ethiopian state religion, and more than 1/2 of all Ethiopians are Christians. 1/5 are Muslims. 1/4 are pagan. There are groups of Falashas, black Jews. 1 out of every 5 Ethiopian males is a priest or monk, large numbers of whom can neither read nor write. These priests chant their liturgy in an archaic Abyssinian language called Ge'ez, which few people understand. They are a part of the entrenched feudal church, which is rich and powerful because through the ages it has acquired at least 1/5 of the land. In a poor feudal society, land is power. This power, joined to that of a small Amharic-speaking, land-holding, office-holding, race-proud upper class, can subtly oppose with heavy inertia even an absolute monarch. The emperor, who is temporal head of the church, must still move cautiously where social, political, and spiritual bonds are so old, so entangled, and so rich. The church is the main storage vessel of Ethiopian culture. It is a web of rules and ceremonies governing marriage, worship, daily life. Saints' days, feast days, fast days, all strictly observed, run into the hundreds. There are 33 days each year devoted to the Virgin Mary alone, 1 each month for the angel St. Michael. Even minor transgressions make one subject to excommunication. But forgiveness can be purchased for cash from the clergy. The church's embrace extends to those in the street outside, the poor and the guilt-ridden, who dare not enter the cathedral itself because they fear they may have sinned and are not in a state of grace. This is Aksum, legendary capital of the Queen of Sheba of the Old Testament and the birthplace of Christianity in Ethiopia. The link of the Ethiopian church with the ancient Jews is close. The Hebrew Ark of the Covenant is still consecrated in each of the multitude of Christian church buildings in the country. Archaeologists at Aksum have not yet decided who erected these obelisks reminiscent of ancient Egypt. Aksum is the treasure house of imperial vestments and crowns of bygone kings. Some Ethiopian kings have been crowned at Aksum. Haile Selassie's coronation in 1930 took place at Addis Ababa, the city of flowers, 390 miles away, the modern capital of a land in which the wild hippopotamus is not an uncommon sight. Beyond the capital, the landscape is biblical, and the life it supports is often pre-biblical. There has never been a census. Estimates of the population say 22 million. What is known, however, is that most Ethiopians, like these galas, live as they always have, under a thatched roof, with few tools, with the limited vision of the isolated, uneducated villager. 70 different languages complicate the process of change. This is Gala, spoken by a semi-primitive people who make up about 40% of the population. Hunger in the countryside is not necessarily a problem. An American economist has reported that the highlands, properly cultivated, could produce sufficient food, not just for isolated Ethiopia, but for all of Western Europe. The emperor seeks to end isolation with transportation. $22 million from the World Bank to increase Ethiopia's 4,000 miles of roads, and the development of a modern international jet airline in a country where ownership of a horse makes a man a member of the gentry. On January 15, 1963, the first Ethiopian Airlines jet comes to the land of the Queen of Sheba. Haile Selassie likes progress. What's more, he has decreed it. The new jet airport opened in 1962. Scissors in hand, the emperor has cut ceremonial ribbons for scores of such projects since his return to power after the Italian occupation. Some of them paid for out of his own imperial pocket. The Lion of Judah rides a modern aircraft, and while jets may link Ethiopia with the outer world, the 17-year-old airline with 8,000 miles of interlocking routes also ties together towns and villages still unconnected by railroads, telephones, or roads. It is a unifying force, politically and commercially, and a boon to a livestock breeding country in which there are 3 times as many cows, donkeys, sheep, and goats as there are people. The line was founded in 1945 with the help of the U.S. airline TWA. Ethiopians are taking over as fast as they can qualify, but most pilots are still Americans. This is Lee Goodman of Eugene, Oregon. The CBS News correspondent is Blaine Littell.
You told me that you carried some lions once.
Yes, lions, crocodiles, and all kinds of animals. Gazelles. Just about everything Ethiopia has.
What were you doing with all this livestock? What were the lions for and the crocodiles?
I think the lions, if I recall, were a present for Tito. If I remember, I'm pretty sure that they were going to Tito.
This is Eritrea, 350 miles northeast of Addis Ababa, formerly an Italian colony. In 1935, Mussolini tried to add Ethiopia to Eritrea by force. In 1962, Haile Selassie reversed the procedure, quietly added Eritrea to Ethiopia. The autonomous federated state voted to unite completely with the empire. Out of fascist conquest was left a heritage of transport, general development, mining exploration, the pleasantly Italianate city of Asmara, and 600 miles of coastline on the Red Sea for the formerly landlocked empire. Many Italians have left, but many stay on in Eritrea, content with the topsy-turvy of history and adding a Latin yeast to the international mix of the empire. Foreign businessmen are important, for the educated Amharic elite looks down on work done with the hands, puts trade and industry in that category, and is not much interested. This new Indian finance textile mill has Indian engineers passing on their techniques to Ethiopians, including children. United Nations studies have located suitable cotton land in Ethiopia, and this crop increases each year. The emperor has been careful to keep doors open to all who want to help, but no one nation is permitted to become the controlling source of progress. This is a Russian hospital built by the Tsar long ago, still staffed by the Soviets. On the other hand, Ethiopia has accepted more than $185 million in military and economic aid from the United States. Massawa on the Red Sea is the home port for Ethiopia's small fleet of merchant ships, for one of the world's smallest navies, complete with frogmen, and for the yacht given the emperor by President Kennedy. In a moment, this story and an interview with the emperor. We now continue with the 20th century, Ethiopia, the Lion and the Cross, Part 2. Massawa in Eritrea is the home of the new Ethiopian Navy. Its flagship is a World War II seaplane tender ordered out of mothballs by the President of the United States and placed at the disposal of Emperor Haile Selassie. It is both a training ship for naval cadets and a personal yacht. One congressman in Washington called the ship a floating palace. It cost us $3 million to refit it. The Navy is essentially a patrol force, and the Emperor's vigilant neutralism, which permits no single foreign nation to exert predominant influence, extends to the armed forces. A Norwegian officer trains this gun crew.
What's your class doing this morning, Lieutenant Selikebogale?
This morning we are doing loading and aiming exercises in manual control.
Very good. We got a big exercise coming up, and I want us to do well. Carry on, please.
All right. Mount 42, load your right gun.
A Frenchman trains the Navy's frogmen.
Before diving, we have to check if everything is in good order. Oxygen in the bottle at the pressure of 150 kilo. If you have enough oxygen, if you have CO2 absorber, it is called sodeline, if your life jacket is well working and everything well working. So now we shall begin the inspection.
A Britisher trains cadets.
Physical drill today. First exercise, a stride jump with arm raising sideway. Exercise, commence. Pop, chip, pop, chip. With arm raising forward and sideway. Change. With a jump. Feet wide astride with arms sideway. Blink. Alternate toe touching left hand to right toe by numbers. Pop, chip, three. Pop, pop, chip, three. Pop.
India, Britain, and the United States have trained the army of 18,500, the Imperial Guard of 5,000. There is a police force of 25,000. A large military force, but perhaps not large for a country whose emperor pleaded in vain for collective security in the 1930s. Today, the Swedes train an Ethiopian Air Force of Swedish Saab 17s and U.S. F-86 Sabre jets. 1/3 of Ethiopia's national budget goes to the armed forces. Her forces fought bravely for the United Nations in Korea, have served in the Congo. Her military strength is one of the most formidable in all of Africa. Newspapers are censored. Since few people can read the papers anyway, government radio news broadcasts are important. They are beamed in Amharic, Swahili, Arabic, French, and English.
ይህ አዲስ አበባ ከተማ የሚገኘው የኢትዮጵያ ራዲዮ ነው። ግርማዊ ንጉሠ ነገሥት ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ መልካም ፈቃዳቸው ሆኖ
جرائد كإثيوبيا كصوبحة متكمدة وفي إنجليزي كصوبحة أوليله إثيوبيان هيرالد.
هنا أديس أبابا صوت إثيوبيا.
هين راديو أديس أبابا صوت إثيوبيا.
Ici Radio Addis Abeba, la voix de l'Éthiopie.
This is the external service of Radio Addis Ababa, the voice of Ethiopia.
At 9:45 Ethiopian time this morning, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I addressed the opening session of the Ethiopian Parliament.
The Emperor appoints the upper house. The lower house is supposedly elected by universal suffrage, but not many Ethiopians vote in this land of high illiteracy. There are no political parties. Until 1959, Parliament could be called a rubber stamp for the Emperor. That year, it insisted the cabinet defend its requests for money. In 1960, it ratified an agreement only when the Emperor threatened to dissolve it. In December 1960, while Haile Selassie was abroad, there was a revolt. The Crown Prince on the platform with the Emperor today, Asfa Wasson, his only living son, proclaimed a true constitutional monarchy, more progress, less paternalism. Loyal troops put down the revolt. There were public hangings, but the prince was forgiven. Since then, younger, more energetic men have appeared in the imperial government. Nowadays, the Crown Prince is seldom seen far from his father's side. The revolt was crushed, as one student put it, but the revolution goes on. We could not show the faces of these young Ethiopians.
At present, there are 98% of the Ethiopian population illiterate, and they are not educated at all. And many of them do not know the meaning of their own existence. And they must know these things. Life for them is just to eat and live. The sun rises and the sun sets. That is the thing they understand. The emperor, I think, knows that there should be a change, that Ethiopia must progress. But he is only one man. He has to ask the advice of his ministers. And the ministers have too much property. Some of them have too much property.
What do you think will happen when the emperor dies?
The people have a great trust in the emperor, and they do not know what is going on in the country. They blindly believe in him. And therefore, if another person comes up outside the royal family, unless he uses force, I don't think his government will be stable.
Conditions around here are so horrible that I even justify some bloodshed if it will later on evolve to something better for the society.
Do you ever get into trouble talking the way you do now?
That's 100% sure. We take very much precaution because, there is a strong intelligence system run privately for the emperor, and actually there are times when we don't even believe our closest friends, and when we are afraid to say anything that the government doesn't approve of.
Some say that Haile Selassie's genius lies in his ability to manipulate both the currents that urge Ethiopia forward and the forces that anchor her to the past. The emperor was 71 in 1962, the year of the death of his youngest son, Salah, and Menen, his wife of 51 years. Isolated, austere, he is not a man of the people, but a man far above the people. He has invited Western European culture into his country, and he has also inspected the offerings of the Russians. He is swift to punish, but to Italian prisoners of war, he was magnanimous. He was the first in Africa to exchange diplomats with Israel, with whom Ethiopia enjoys a close relationship. Questions had to be submitted in advance for this interview with Blaine Littell. The emperor answers in Amharic.
Your Majesty, what, in your opinion, are Ethiopia's greatest needs?
ግርማዊነቱ አስተያየት በአሁኑ ጊዜ ኢትዮጵያ በጣም የሚያስፈልጋት ነገሮች ምንድን ናቸው?
አሁን እንደጀመረችው ኢትዮጵያን የሚያስፈልጋት
We have already begun the program most essential for Ethiopia. That is, to raise the standard of living of her people through education and better health. These would be the primary objectives. Her remaining needs will not be forgotten and will also be taken care of.
Your Majesty has taken a personal interest and a personal hand in almost every phase of life in Ethiopia. But does Your Majesty not sometimes grow weary and perhaps feel that this is all too much work for one man?
This is really not significant. One individual naturally cannot shoulder the responsibility of a whole nation. We have already told this to our ministers and government officials. Our main objective in the administration of the affairs of 22 million people is that all should cooperate and share responsibility. This has always been our program and will continue to be our program. Our wish is to serve our country as an Ethiopian. It is our conviction that the administration of a country should not depend on one person, but is rather the concern of all. Each in his own way must help his country.
What has Your Majesty learned from the attempted coup d'etat?
You can say that they have learned from us, those who attempted the coup d'etat. There is nothing that we have learned from them. If you examine their demands, you will find we have already started these reforms. We would have been delighted to learn something new from them.
Does Your Majesty see Ethiopia emerging as a leader, or perhaps even the leader of Africa?
Ethiopia does not have any intention of being the leader of Africa as such. It hopes to live harmoniously with all its African sister countries. How long did the American Confederation take to become united? I believe you even fought a war about it.
Would Your Majesty care to say a few words in English?
My English is very poor. The most critical issue that has filled the world in recent times was the Cuba-US conflict. The statesmanship and wisdom of Prime Minister Khrushchev has greatly helped to ease the situation. We'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate both President Kennedy and President Premier Khrushchev, as well as Secretary General Yultan.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty.
Haile Selassie is adored and feared. He can reward, and he does. He can decree flogging and death, and he has. Yet he has also acted on his own words, do not reward evil with evil. Almost 30 years ago, the emperor called every able-bodied man in the empire to arms to defend the nation with gun and spear. He could command the same support today. But the King of Kings is older. Already eager hands have tried to shake the throne of this 225th ruler in a line claiming descent from the biblical Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. In the future, will his successors have the strength of this man, who for a time was a hero far beyond his kingdom? Will they lead a headlong rush into the 20th century with all of its perils? Or continue the steady, stately, if slow walk forward Haile Selassie seems to have decreed?
Story of next week's episode in a moment. And now a message from your host, the Prudential Insurance Company of America. Next week at this time, the Prudential will present the story of small boats and small boating, of the 7 million small craft and the millions of spare-time sailors at sea, on the lakes, and even on the once bone-dry desert. Next week, this story. This is Walter Cronkite reporting for the 20th Century.